Hello. Good morning to everyone. Great to meet you here. There's so many of us this morning or this afternoon, depending really on the time zone you're in. I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of APSCE, Asia Pacific Society for Computers and Education. So it's a society dealing with computers in education, focusing on Asia Pacific, but also globally. And we are actually hosting a series of webinars throughout the year. So this is actually the first seminar in our this year's sequence, and I'm very happy to present our first speaker, Professor Ken Khan, and he will present, as I said, the first seminar that we have in sequence. Before Ken starts with all this, let me just briefly share the slides, a few slides on the things that we are working on as part of APSCE. So hopefully that will be interesting for your side, and hopefully you can join us in one of APSCE activities. So so this seminar is run as part of the special interest group, so-called SIG, which we call TEML, so Technology Enhanced Learning for Mobility of Learners and Learning Experiences. We were formerly known as COMTEL. This is just for the people who already actually participated in our activities, but we renamed ourselves to actually better reflect the current state of the art in this area. So this is just to briefly let you know what is our agenda for this newly named TEML SIG. So we really want to examine cutting-edge technologies in learning and have more focus on AI, generative AI in learning, but not to neglect contemporary pedagogies for different designs like individual or collaborative learning. So we are really interested in all aspects of technologies, as well as social and technological aspects as well. So you will notice the link to our SIG. The link is just below the slide. And so this is actually what I had in mind to get us started. And I will actually hand over to our speaker, Ken Khan. Let me just briefly introduce him, although you're probably well aware of his work. So he actually finished computer science at MIT. He has a lot of experience in programming, but focus a lot on different ways animation films and different kinds of animations can be actually used in education. He was focusing on child's play, and one of his baby's technologies apps is ToonTalk. He even has a patent there. So he will be able to reflect on his experience, but also show us the novel stuff that he's working on. And of course, the focus will be as we noted in the title, how we can actually creatively use generative AI to support students. So that's something that we have been, all of us have been thinking of for a while. There has been a lot of resistance from schools, and our students are so crazy about ChatGPT and generative AI. So, and many schools, unfortunately, are starting to forbid this technology. But in this talk, we are going the opposite way. Let's see how we can use this technology in a creative and interesting way to support our students. Professor Ken Khan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I thought I'd just start for a minute giving a broader context of how I got interested in creative uses of chatbots like this. Because as Evika was saying, you know, I've had a long career both in AI, but also in programming languages for children and programming environments and tools for children. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I started focusing on adding AI capabilities to Snap, block-based programming language that's a superset of Scratch. And the idea was to make it so it's really easy for children to use all sorts of machine learning models in their own applications, but making it as simple as possible. And it was working well. I was really happy with it. And then about a year ago, I started to experiment a bit with, well, how much of these kinds of apps that I was seeing children make, or that how many of them can be done just by a conversation with a chatbot? So that's what I'll be talking about in a minute. So I'll share my screen here. And I'll make this, let me hide this and make this full screen. Oh boy. I'm going to hide the Zoom interface that's getting in the way of what I wanted to show. Okay. Good. And then I'll just click here. So I put into the Zoom chat the URL for all these slides, and there's a lot of resources that hopefully you'll find it worthwhile exploring, but this is also a way to get to it. And not only do I have all the notes for all these different experiments I'll be talking about, but also there's links to 2 papers I've written about this topic. But let's get started with the main thing. So when I was at MIT, I was partly in the AI lab and partly in the Logo group, and worked with Seymour Papert. And sorry, is there a question? Or so he wrote this paper way back in 1970 called Teaching Children Thinking. And it starts off with this quote, which I think is very appropriate for what I'm talking about today. So he said the purpose of the essay is to present a grander vision of what an educational system in which technology is used, not in the form of machines for processing children. He meant, computer-aided instruction kinds of work, which was popular even back then, but as something that the children themselves will learn to manipulate, to extend, to apply to projects, and thereby gaining a greater and more articulate mastery of the world, a sense of the power of applied knowledge, and a self-confidently realistic image of himself as an intellectual agent. So that first part, I think, is a good match for what I'll be talking about, conversations with chatbots and generative AI. But then, and he goes on to say that, along with Dewey and Montessori and Piaget, and by the way, Seymour worked with Piaget for a few years. He knew they were collaborators. The children learn by doing and by thinking about what they do. So he argues that the most important thing for educational innovation is to come up with better things for children to do and better ways for them to think about themselves while they're doing those things. And the first half of it, doing better things, I think is very clear cut. Hopefully you'll agree by the end of my talk. And what's an interesting research topic is the second half of it. So the question is, with at least the first half of what I'll be talking about, which is around creating programs, web apps, is this a better thing than the older conception? So a child goes up to a chatbot and says, I want to make a web game in which there's a fairy and a cute monster that does riddles. And this was just one of about 100 different experiments I've done, where in this case, I was asking the chatbot to simulate 2 characters, Ada and Curio. Ada being the really good programmer, and Curio one that kind of tries to give a context, ask questions a lot. Curious, that's why his name. And it just sort of flows as a natural conversation. I'll give you an in-depth example in a minute. So I'll be talking a bit about, or giving you a sense of the huge range of apps that you could build by just having a conversation with something like ChatGPT. And of course, I usually talk about ChatGPT, but uh, I'm not going to talk about today, but I have tried, Bard and Gemini and Claude and some of these other ones, and they come close to what I'm talking about. As a matter of fact, some of them even do better than the free version of ChatGPT. But I've been mostly focusing on version 4, which gives me more of a sense of where the future is going to be, because it's the most advanced one, and the most advanced one will be the more common one, I think, over time. So almost all the experiments I did was, with a lot of typing and reading into my laptop. But I did a few experiments, and I'll talk about one in a minute, where I just used the app that OpenAI provides for ChatGPT, where it was just a matter of talking back and forth with the app to create apps. So here's the example that I wanted to talk about. And if you click on this link, you'll see resources and a description of what this is. But I want to walk you through it a little bit. And so, yeah, here it is. So here's the log of my conversation with, and I try not to rely on the expertise that I have after whatever 40 plus years of working with computers and programming and so on. So imagine in this case, maybe a 12-year-old or 14-year-old kind of doing this. And I'll give you some examples where even much younger children could probably be doing this. So, let me get to the very beginning. Sorry, I didn't realize I had. So, again, this was completely verbal, both ends. I would speak and it would respond. I just started off saying, "Hello, how are you?" And it says, "I'm here to assist you." And then I say, "I want to make an app that will tell the distance from where I am to any city in the world." And it says, "Oh, that's an exciting project, but you'll have to do all this complicated stuff." And I said, I don't want to do all that. Isn't there a way to do this with just a web page? And it said, absolutely, you could do with all this sort of stuff. And I said, I'm going to need a lot of help with this because I'm pretending to not be capable at all of doing these things. And I start off by asking, can you make a very simplified version of this and just give me a download link to try? So very soon after, it says, I've created it. It does this. And I did this actually on my tablet where the files are, but if you actually click on this, it says, well, it's the sessions expire. We don't have the links anymore, but I'll show you at the end the final result and so on. But what as it says here, I think, or somewhere, yeah, that this first version, the way it worked was you had a drop-down menu of the 3 cities, and you clicked on one of the cities, and it would also then use the web API to find out the geolocation of where the device is, and it knew how to calculate using this formula how far away it was. And I said, but what was confusing was that it actually generated something that was correct, but it wasn't working. And you'll see what happened here. I said, that's nice, but it couldn't figure out where I am. And it kind of said, yeah, it should. And here, and I say, when it does it, nothing happens. So this is one of the issues with the current technology, is that sometimes things don't work, and the student needs to be able to at least give some feedback to the chatbot as to what the problem is. So, so what happens is it produces a version that catches any errors and shows it to the user. And the error that came up was user denied geolocation. And it gives a whole explanation of why, for security reasons, some browsers don't let you find out your geolocation. So, we went back and forth about what might be wrong. And then it turns out, for reasons that I don't understand, at least, that Chrome on Android has much stricter constraints than Chrome on my laptop. So the program worked. It just was a security issue there. Anyways, we go on and I say, but I don't want to have just a drop down. I want to be able to enter any city in the world. And it says, well, here's three APIs that we could use. And I say, oh, could you use one of them? And then we talk, and then it starts to no longer provide the download links. So it shows me all the code that I would need. And I say, yeah, that's good, but can't you put it in a file? And it tries, and then it apologizes, but it keeps getting errors trying to do it, and it tries again. And then it tells me, well, you could just copy the entire thing. There's a little button for doing that, and then paste it into a file with a .html name and so on. So it gets a little bit clumsy here, but much of what I'm talking about is what's coming soon in terms of how easy this could be, where some of these kind of little glitches are much rarer. Anyways, we go back and forth, and I ask it to improve the appearance, and I do this and that. So let me show you what the result was. So here's what the app looks like. And if I click on this, because of security, it's asking, is it allowed to, do I allow it to find out my location? I say yes, and it fills in the latitude. And since I'm in London, you can see I'm nearly at Greenwich. So then I could enter any city in the world. So maybe I'll pick Singapore. And then this API requires a key, but because it's a free service and it's just, there's no real issue about secrecy or privacy, you could define any key you want. And the key that I chose was ToonTalk, my earlier programming language. So if I say to get the city's location, what happened here? It got the location. Oh, and then I said calculate distance. There we go. And it says that, Singapore is 10,855.39 kilometers. And if a student wanted to understand how this worked, they could either look at the code or talk to the chatbot about, well, how's this program working? How does it calculate this? Could you explain this? One of the experiments I'm doing is trying to get the chatbot for students that want to understand what's going on, to instead of showing them, this very complicated technical code like this, to give them what's called pseudocode, a sort of a natural language version of what it is, but still capturing all the important ideas. Okay, so that's the example I wanted to talk about. And, this works fine on phones or tablets or anything, this idea of using this. But most of what I'm going to show you is more relying on a browser with a keyboard and stuff. All right, so I'll move on. And one way to think about is there a question?
Americano.
I'll keep going. I don't know what's. So,
Sa kon man ni sa road sa kon baka ng cement mga palugat.
I think somebody has their microphone on. Maybe shouldn't.
Hi, sir.
Anyways, okay. So we'll have questions later at the end of this. So one way to think about this is this idea of pair programming that's been popular for quite a while and is even used in computer science courses, undergraduate, high school level, where there's two roles. One is the driver, who's actually doing all the technical things of generating the code and entering it into the system. And then there's the observer and the navigator that's giving guidance and feedback and so on. And that the idea here is that the chatbot is acting like the driver and the human, the navigator. And we're not talking about apps that are built by AIs. They're really built with. It's a whole conversation back and forth, like I tried to illustrate with the example of the city distance example. All right, let's move on. So there's a lot of talk about prompt engineering. And by the way, this URL here is a fantastic resource. I mean, it's a little bit aimed at higher education, but a lot of it applies more broadly, and also applies. It discusses chatbots for more business-oriented purposes. But the professor from the University of Pennsylvania who's been doing this, one of his blog posts here is about prompt engineering, and he basically says there's two styles, and they both have their advantages and disadvantages. One is one where you give a very elaborate prompt that tries to convey to the chatbot what the role it should have, what the goal is, give it instructions, what kind of pedagogy you want, constraints, and so on. And if you write one of these, I find that it doesn't work perfectly the first time, so you have to kind of revise it a bit, try it again. But after 2 or 3 iterations, I usually get pretty good one. So I'll give you an example of one that I've used that I've found that it works quite well in a lot of contexts. So giving it the context that you're helping somebody who might have no programming experience and they want to build a web-based app on a topic of their choosing. And then the instructions are, welcome them, ask them how old they are, proceed with age-appropriate text, ask them their name, and use that occasionally, and how much experience they've had, so that it adjusts the way it interacts with the student appropriately. And then ask them if they have an idea for a web page, wait for an answer. If they don't have an idea, you could ask a series of questions trying to find out what their interests are, and then suggest some ideas, and you go back and forth. And then these chatbots, you can't give them a really complicated description of what you want. You can't ask for too much at once. But that's maybe very good pedagogically, that they have to kind of break the problem down, start with the simplest version of what they want, and then incrementally keep asking for little improvements and testing it, making sure it's both working and doing what they want and giving feedback. So it's important for the chatbot to know this is the style that you want the interaction to follow. And then there's technical details about how to avoid requiring lots of copy and paste, instead provide a download link. Though this last part here only works right now for ChatGPT version 4, but you can get by without this. I've done things with children where this wasn't available, and they mostly did copy and paste okay, though that did cause some issues. And then finally, you want to say to the chatbot what kind of pedagogy you want and what kind of tone you want, and so on. So once you have a prompt like this, there's 2 ways you could use it. You could just copy and paste it into any chatbot of your choice, and then just get going. And one advantage of that is that you're not tied to a particular chatbot. And also, if either the teacher or student wants to customize it, it's easy to do. The alternative is that somebody like me creates a customized chatbot from OpenAI or from Poe or from any of these services. And then all they need is to click on the URL, and they've got a customized version of the chatbot that's focused on giving them this kind of particular support that you want to give the students. So here's what I've done in the last year. I've made 27 different examples. This one we just saw, Distance Any City, is the last one that I did. And the style in which most of these, not everyone, but I would say almost all of them, I was imagining a child of a certain age and a certain background, and just trying to role play that. I'll talk in a minute about some real students, real children, and what they've done. But I want to give a sense of the broad variety here. So all of these, if you want to come back later and explore them, you could either see the OpenAI log or the PDF version of it, or you could try the app. Like if you just click here, the app starts up. And this one, if you look at the log of discussion, it started with saying, I want a button that when you push it, it'll just speak a random number in a random language with a random pitch and a random rate. So if I click here,
675
so that was 675 in Chinese with a little bit high pitch, and in Korean with a slow one and so on. And here, then asked it, well, at some point I asked it to replace it with pictures rather than just buttons. And then here I said, could you make it so that it repeats whatever the user said, but in a in a random language and pitch. So if I click on this, I think it's listening now. And if I stop talking,
If he click on this, he think it's listening now, and if he stop talking.
So it picked Spanish, United States style Spanish, with a slow rate and high pitch, but also ended up asking it that if somebody had a Google Translate API key, they could paste it in here, and then it will not just repeat it, but it'll translate it. So that's one of 27 examples. This next one, you see a video feed, but you could, with your finger, sort of paint on it, and you could say words like red or green or blue, and the paint that lets left behind on the screen. Number 3 was an example of really doing some machine learning, maybe at high school level, where you're trying to train a machine learning model to guess how confident somebody is from a sentence. And it does all the building the model, training it, and so on. It's pretty sophisticated. And again, all of these, I didn't do any of the programming. It was all a matter of conversing back and forth, and all the code gets generated by ChatGPT. Conversations, we're going to talk about that later, but this was an app for making it. Here's an example that's maybe for kind of a younger kid kind of example, and it's kind of cute, which is these flowers are all fading, but if we drop a water balloon on them, they get bigger and bigger, and we could rescue, any of them. That's a simple little game, but it's, one point about that is that I don't believe it existed before. If you ask for a game like Pong, it's in the training data seen thousands of examples of Pong or something. So it's not so surprising that it could generate a good version. But if you're kind of coming up with something creative on your own, it's challenging the system. And another app that built, but again, you could often do this without an app now, is have the chatbot help you produce a illustrated story. Fireworks, one of the things I do with Fireworks is just ask, I've tried, maybe 10 different providers of chatbots, create a page with Fireworks. It's sort of a simple example. There's one about, here, this number 11 is an attempt to do some real serious data science where, maybe at high school level or even undergraduate level, where the question was, if the record of previous weather, temperature, and rain, precipitation, does that have any effect on whether weeks later influenza cases are above or below normal? And there was quite an interesting, experiment to try to get it to work, and it built an app where you could upload the data and it'll train the model and then make predictions and so on. Super calculator I like as an example of kind of the fun things you could do with mathematics. So it could just add numbers, 2 and 2 is 4. But I could also say, how about 2 to the 20,000th power or something? Calculate this. Oh, I'm adding it. But if I say power and say calculate, then you have to click here, and here's the answer, which just goes on and on and on and on and on. So it's kind of a fun thing. I think a lot of kids find large numbers pretty exciting. And one of the things that it really was fun, but it was a bit of a challenge to get the chatbot to create this correctly, is you could say calculated in English. And here's the 398 sextillion, 27 quintillion. It goes on and on. As a matter of fact, it would take a long time to say this number, and it could do even bigger numbers or something. And one more thing that I thought was kind of interesting is you could do it this way. That's much better. It could deal well with fractions in various ways. So if I say I want to see it as a fraction, well, that's pretty, oops, sorry. I pushed the wrong button there. I want to say calculate here. And then see the result, and it's just showing you, oh, wait a minute, what did I do? Oh, I'm still doing, I wanted to do division. Yeah, well, that's not very exciting. But if I said, I want to see it as a decimal number and calculate this. If you notice, it's put the bar over the part that's repeating. So it's it's a long repeating decimal or something. Anyway, lots of fun with numbers if one is interested in that. And the important lesson here is that whatever interest somebody has, there's so many ways they could explore it here. If they're interested in how ants collect food or avoid enemies or something, you could create a game that has some biological backing of it. You can make an AR game. This one, I don't know if it'll work with, because I'm on Zoom, because it requires the camera, but you see yourself, but animated balloons are falling, and you could pop them with your finger, and it's kind of fun. And here's an example of one that I think even a very young child could do. And it's a very simple idea that this feather moves around, and when you click here, on the other hand, here's a really ambitious project, the biggest one I've done. So in this one, if I click here, it just puts down random emojis. And if I move like this, we get a whole bunch of them or something. And then I could click here to get what's called a black hole. And it actually is simulating gravity, and they're all getting sucked into the black hole. And even some of them start to orbit, so on. Another thing you could do is you could say, I want each emoji to chase another emoji or something. So they're all chasing each other. And these other things, by the way, you can make it go faster if I click the horse a few times. Oops. And this will make the new emojis smaller or bigger. And then one more feature, let me start it up again just to clear it, is if I have a bunch of emojis here, I could have them dance. Alice, he's almost fine. Building Lego towers that reach the sky. And by the way, that song was actually generated by a generative AI that Microsoft's Copilot has a connection with. So you could ask it, make a song about, these two kids that are a certain age and what they like doing, and it made a 30-second song right there. And then the AI knew how to make these catch the beat of the music and how to do it, and even it could be, if you turn on the microphone, it'll listen to. And there's one more thing that I think is worth showing here. That's fun here. First off, it works better if I make the emojis a bit smaller. So if I make a whole bunch of emojis here, and then I click here and say, spell cat.
I can now understand almost anything you say.
So what's going on here now, it's still listening, is that it'll make an emoji that matches whatever I'm saying. But of course, what I'm saying now isn't really sensible. But if I say a smiling face, smiling face, finger pointing upward. Well, not too good, but You get the idea. Well, let's maybe move on. But it's fun that you do so many different things. And half the features here were ones that it suggested. I had some of the ideas. It had the idea of dancing, and it had the idea of spelling things out like this. So this was the most ambitious one. Most of these took a few hours or something. Some of the more ambitious ones longer. But this one actually did take about 40 hours because there's so many features to it. It was 250 back and forths with the chatbot. And maybe I'll show you one more just because to connect this up more with schools and science. This is one where I pretended to be a child who was particularly interested in astronomy and interested in exoplanets. And you can look at the log of the conversation, but what we're seeing here is actually the TRAPPIST-1 exoplanet solar system. And if you click on any of the planets, you get the details of how big it is and how far away it is from the sun. And NASA has these nice posters for visiting this place or something. And it's 3D. I could see it from a different part, or I could zoom in and so on. And it's based on the real data from NASA or something. So you can really do some pretty interesting projects, and you don't have to have that much technical skill is the point. Okay, that's pretty much what I wanted to say about that. If you want to explore this, there's even an app for exploring it that kind of steps you through each of these apps with a little explanation and so on. So the last demo I want to show you is I worked with, I did an online course with 7 or 8 Indian kids, 9 years to 15 years old. And the 9-year-old made 3 apps. And this was the first one she made on her own, talking to ChatGPT. And she, on my suggestion, used this way of sharing it using CodePen, where you just, if it's HTML, you paste it here. If it's CSS, you paste it here. If it's JavaScript, you paste it here. And she full page view. So here's her app. And if you click on one of these flowers, it starts to head over to the basket. And it's keeping score here. It says how many flowers I've collected and how many are missed and so on. So pretty impressive thing for a 9-year-old. I have to confess, she was definitely above average and had 2 years of programming experience, even though she was only 9. And then she made a joke generator that had some images and sound effects that was quite nice, and a question answering one and stuff. So it was pretty impressive. Okay, so stepping back to the big picture here, Seymour Papert in Mindstorms is a book about these ideas. He talks about computer programming languages that have 2 things they provide. One is control over the computer, so that you could create all sorts of apps, whatever it is the child's interested in thinking about, wants to explore. But also it comes a new language for describing thinking and thinking about your thing and he talks about it as a source of descriptive devices that is strengthening language. That Piaget, Dewey, everyone understood that reflecting on your own efforts, projects especially, is a great way to learn, but you reflect better if you've got more concepts for reflection, thinking about how you think about thinking and so on. And maybe that's getting lost here because you're not dealing with things at the low technical level. But on the other hand, here's what I think might be gained, which is the ability of anyone to create apps by conversing in their own language. These chatbots know a fair number of languages, and every few months a new one comes that knows even more. And then the range of things you could create is so much greater because these chatbots know thousands of libraries and APIs. So if you want 3D graphics, it knows how to do that. If you want to paraphrase detection, you could do that. If you want speech recognition, all sorts of things, it'll just know how to incorporate it in your app, which is pretty far from what Logo or Scratch or Snap. And then it could adjust so well to the level of the student. It's always there all the time to help the student. And it may be the case that a human, a teacher, or some kind of tutor that really understands programming and has good pedagogical practice could do much better, but they're very scarce, and there's no way every student in a class could have that kind of help. So the fact that you're getting still maybe average or above average help, even if it doesn't reach the optimal, it's a great thing. And I think there's some kinds of frustrations that it's avoiding. I've seen kids get stuck with bugs and get so frustrated they either quit or start over again. And even though debugging could be a great learning opportunity, they find it sometimes very frustrating. Here, it's a different kind of frustration where it kind of keeps making mistakes and you have troubles telling it what's wrong, so it fixes things. By the way, another kind of mistake, that orbital simulation of that solar system. At first, I kept saying, but the planets aren't moving. The planets aren't moving. And it kept saying, well, I'll try to fix it. And it kept saying the planets aren't moving. And finally, back and forth, we discovered that, yes, they were moving, but it programmed them to be realistic. So if it took 3 days for them to go around the sun, in the simulation, it would take 3 days to go around the sun. So in the minute I was watching it, the motion, it didn't even move maybe a whole pixel. So it was working. But then we came up with, a factor of speeding it up 10,000 times or whatever. And here's one more way to think about what's gained and lost here or something. So the idea of these formal languages and programming constructs and getting new ways of thinking, if a student wants to learn that, then the chatbot could be a great tool for learning programming, it could explain things. It could give you documentation in the context of what you're in the middle of doing. It could help you with debugging. And as I mentioned, it's possible to get it to show you things more in English pseudocode rather than in the more technical things, but it's still capturing the important computational thinking ideas. And debugging is very different in this world. I mean, the chatbot will, if you tell it there's a problem, maybe it'll add some print statements and ask you to copy and paste the log so it could figure out maybe what's going on, but it's not quite the same. But there's a lot of good things still going on. The incremental development, the way in which you're giving specifications, and they don't have to be as precise as with programming languages. The students can be very creative, like that 9-year-old that made that flower collecting game. You really have to exercise your design skills to get something that you should be proud of. And it's very easy to share these things. They're web apps that are just URLs to play with. You need to think critically and give critical feedback to the chatbot to get it to do what you want, improving your communication skills. There's a lot of good stuff going on. And then the last thing I'm going to say about web apps is that Seymour Papert wrote another thing that I think was very relevant much more recently, still 24 years ago, but which is the idea of powerful ideas, that there's 3 aspects to them. They could be powerful in how you use them, how they connect together, and how they kind of, the roots fit with your own personal thinking. And he gives examples that are very much the kinds of things that I've explored with chatbots about simulations, games, mathematics, probability, there's quite a lot you could do here. So that's what I wanted to say about creating web apps, but in the little bit of time I have left, let me see how much time. I want to give a sense that there's a lot more creative things you could do with chatbots. And these are the 5 things I wanted to touch on. So one of them is you could ask it to make stories, but you could ask it to make stories that illustrate a proof or help you understand something in a scientific process or something. And you can be very creative about it. You could not just ask it for a story about something you're learning about prime numbers, but you could say, oh, I want it to be as a play or a love sonnet, or, you could have fun with it. There's even a series of jokes, and it'll try to come up with these. So if you're interested, follow the links and you could see examples of this. And it's not just something like prime numbers. You can do really complicated things like cardinality of infinite sets, of incompleteness theorem, halting problems, really difficult theorems that are difficult undergraduates understanding, or ones that are more high school level, like why is the square root of 2 irrational? And you could get stories about this. And my idea isn't just that the stories themselves are pedagogically valuable, but that what I think a teacher might experiment with is telling the students, on some topic that's going on in the class. Ask the chatbot to create some story or poem or some kind of literature, but then hand in not just the story, but how well reflect on how well it conveys the ideas. It makes sure there's no inaccuracies, because it will make mistakes, and so the student's job is to catch any mistakes and reflect on the whole process. So you can make it into a much more constructionist kind of idea. So here's another idea that's inspired by this blog post by this history professor. And what I did based on his idea was I just simply said to ChatGPT, I want to be the player in a text-based game where I'm in Damascus in May 1348 and the city's in chaos due to the plague. So if you want to see how it went, you could follow these links. But it was really quite a realistic simulation where I got to meet the physicians and go to find out more about this and see what's happening in the city. And you only had some limited resources, and you were in control. I mean, it would give you a few options, but you could do almost anything you want in the city trying to deal with this. And it was quite good at simulating things. And then again, the assignment he had, and this professor, and I think was a good idea, is that you have the students not just have this immersive experience to learn something about the subject matter, but also to their job is to assess how well it was, catch any mistakes, isn't just to accept it, but to reflect upon it. And I tried taking this idea and looking at ethical dilemmas. And the first one was one between a teenager and their parents. Then pacifism and the belief that, you're 1776 and should the U.S. Break away from England, but can you do it without having a war? And or this third one, you're role playing an advisor to President Truman about what to do with the atomic bombs to end the World War II. So you could have, and here's a kind of all you need to do to create such a chat-based adventure. I said to ChatGPT, create a text-based adventure with a high school student struggling with a conflict between what her parents are instructing her and what she knows is right. Choose a conflict that reflects differences between the young and old. Briefly set up the situation, list the alternative actions the player can make, including enter your own, and wait for the player to respond. That's all that we needed. And if you follow the links to the logs, you'll see it. It came up with a pretty interesting scenario where the high school girl, she's very environmentally oriented. She's part of the environment club at school, but the parents have a small business that's doing harm to the environment, and they don't really want her daughter to be participating in the environment club. And there's a lot of things going on in the story. It's well worth exploring if you think this kind of thing is valuable. Another example is one where I simply said this one sentence, right? Which is simulated conversation between Aristotle and Galileo in such a way that after every exchange, I could add something. So the two of them are talking to each other, and then I say, well, what about falling objects? And then Aristotle says, well, obviously heavier ones fall faster. And then Galileo says, no, I beg to. They're very polite to each other, and I beg to differ. And then you can ask them, what evidence do they have? And they come back with their reasoning. And then at some point I said in this conversation, oh, can you bring Isaac Newton in? And he starts talking about gravity and explaining things in more up-to-date ways. So again, you could do quite a lot. And of course, it doesn't have to be science. It could be an historical thing or whatever, meeting, or even, oh yeah, sorry. Or even, I even did ones where I had, a conversation with a lion and an elephant, and you're learning something about their biology. So here's another aspect of this idea of having conversations, simulated individuals. I said simply, simulate a discussion between two people. One is very skeptical and always looking for flaws in reasoning. The other is a very good problem solver. The problem they were given is, and then you just try different kinds of problems. And one that I chose was one that in a paper, they noted that none of these chatbots do very well on it. They really get mixed up with this problem. And the problem is that Joe says that he lives 10 miles from Lake Michigan, and Beth lives 10 miles from Lake Michigan. Doesn't matter that I mistyped it. And he and Beth live 100 miles apart. Is it possible that Joe's telling the truth? So if you think of Lake Michigan as a point, which is the problem that these chatbots often do, then obviously the furthest they could be apart is 20 miles. There's a circle and with the lake in the middle. But if you look at the conversation that comes out when you ask it to have these two different characters discuss it, they get confused in the beginning as well. And they talk about 20 miles and so on. But then they start thinking, well, the lake can be 118 miles across. But then they worry that's too much. And then they go back and forth and they finally figure out a possible way in which it's true. And then they realize that, well, even though that's maybe improbable, the question was whether it's possible he's telling the truth, not whether it's probable. So they agree that he's telling the truth. And then if you want to see how bad it could be, if you just ask the question right off, there's the link for that. And I thought that was interesting because you're kind of getting into the reasoning of the chatbot by asking it to have these two personas discussing a problem. And you could ask the chatbot to create debates about any topic, and you could add to that whether or not you want to participate in the debate or just watch these two teams. And again, like what I mentioned about, if you ask a chatbot to make a Pong game that it's seen so much in its training data, well, there's a lot of debates that you could ask, is homework a good thing or not? There's probably many high school debates on the web about such a thing. But if you ask for something absurd that nobody's ever discussed, like everybody in the world should be wearing pink polka dotted clothing, it's really surprising how well the pro team manages to come up with some arguments. And of course, the other team manages to pull them down. It's quite informative to try these things on any topic. And then you can make illustrated stories. I want to show very quickly one that I made for my granddaughter, who's Wednesday going to be 3 years old. Her name is Cece, and it makes a story. She wakes up and it's her birthday, and then she's on the trampoline and a magic balloon comes and she's wearing her unicorn costume, and then she goes to a magical land where she meets the unicorn and goes on a big adventure with him. And there's this gremlin that they encounter, and then everybody's dancing and happy, and the colors have been removed and she's putting them back by painting them. And by the way, of course, all the illustrations are coming from DALL-E 3 via ChatGPT, and then it's her birthday and they're all so anyways, I think the idea that kids could make illustrated stories, and they can make illustrated stories about something maybe school related too, about some scientific thing or mathematical thing. And their job is would be to hand in not just the story, but talk about the process, which parts they contributed, which parts the chatbot did, how they kind of guided it, did it reflect on it and see it as a co-creation or something. So getting close to the end here. So this is just going back to the original topic of if educational innovation is about enabling students to do better things and better ways to think about what they're doing, I would argue that from when Logo was first created in 1967 up until quite recently, the best way to do this was having the children learn programming languages. But maybe starting last year, it's generative AI. And then in terms of the question about encouraging them to be reflective and think about what they're doing, I think even the chatbot could be given prompts to help encourage the student to reflect about what they're doing, to ask sort of questions to get them to think about what's going on. And I'm doing a lot of this without any collaborators. So if anybody's really excited about doing this work, send me an email and maybe we could collaborate on some of this. And I have done very little, only one example of a face-to-face work it was like an after-school science museum session with some kids. So I haven't had much experience with real kids other than the online course with the Indian kids. So I'm happy to answer questions. And I have to say, what I thought was funny is that I asked ChatGPT to make an illustration for the question period of this talk. And here's what it came up with. And I did mention that I'd be wearing an Indonesian shirts. So if I stop sharing here, we can see I'm wearing my Indonesian shirt here. Good. So
thank you very
happy
much,
to
Ken.
entertain questions. I don't know if there's much time left.
Thank you very much, Ken, for this inspiring talk. It was great learning from you during this talk. So let me just ask for the questions. So there is this Q&A feature, which you can choose on the bottom of your screen, and feel free to ask questions there. It seems there is one question already. Right. And since Ken just finished his talk, I will give him a little bit of time, and perhaps I can ask a simple question to get the discussion started. So you said you have been working with the kids and also probably got in touch with the teachers. So no doubt the kids are they're experiencing fun and enjoying the thing. But what about the teachers? Do they surface any concerns in regards to, like this whole setup, changing their job, the fact that they need to do the curriculum, and actually the fact that it takes time to master this technology? So how sustainable this would be from the teacher's perspective? And just to have this question from to continue with the question from Jatin, the question is, how do we evaluate this? On which parameters? How do we know we achieved our goals in terms of cognitive advancement or any other?
Right. Well, I would, like to have a lot more interaction with teachers, but I've been traveling and I retired from the University of Oxford, so I don't have as much firsthand. But when I was in Hong Kong for 4 months very recently, and I both talked to a lot of professors in education departments and also the graduate students. Some of them, were teachers that were getting a further degree, and I don't have a sense of of numbers, but there's definitely, and also, of course, there's a lot of online discussion about in teacher forums, and I spent some time with a few of these, that there are definitely some teachers that are very enthusiastic about this, that really get the idea and are seeing not only how it could help them in their lesson planning or in evaluating student work or something, but also that how the students themselves could be creatively using chatbots and just in ways that look pedagogically valuable. The it's one of these situations where it's very hard to come up with a good quantitative way to assess how well any of this is working, and that's a real challenge here. That you know, there are ways of qualitatively assessing research, or to and maybe those have to be applied in this case, because even in the machine learning community, where there's, you know, thousands of papers every week, they have this problem. I'm still in a meeting. Sorry, somebody at the door. That the way they would evaluate things is almost all single exchanges with the chatbot. It'll say, if you give the chatbot this problem with this introductory text, here's how well it solves the problem, or here's how well it generates a story, or here's how well it does something. And the whole point of what I was saying is that the important thing is really these long conversations. And that makes it very hard to quantitatively assess, because when it's a single one, these researchers can run thousands of experiments, you know, with the chatbot, giving it all sorts of different problems or variants, and just gather statistics showing, you know, 87% of the time it comes up with the right solution or whatever. But we're kind of stuck with something that has to be much more qualitative and much more kind of a personal assessment as to whether the response was valuable, whether the students were getting something valuable out of it. So it's a really difficult open question of how to evaluate this well. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. We have another question from Tore Hoyle. So I will now invite Tore Hoyle to talk because the person hasn't used the Q&A feature. Let's see if that works.
Okay.
Tore Hoyle, could you please ask your question now?
Yeah, my question is related to how do we kind of build this into a kind of AI literacy program or initiative in order to kind of bring this out to the teachers. How have you any ideas how we could kind of use your great example to kind of have more emphasis on how this could be done? Because my feeling is that a lot of teachers are really wondering, how am I to do this? I mean, is it complicated to do or whatever? It's because I think it's a matter of trying to bring this out to the teachers that are having the wrong questions actually about how to deal with the chatbots and ChatGPT and generative AI. They're still locked into this cheating discussion, and they don't see the opportunities that you have showed.
Right. No, that's a really good question. So first off, I've been really focusing on these kind of creative uses, you know, creating web apps or text-based simulations or whatever. And you could create these in such a way that, I mean, it kind of avoids some of the questions about, even hallucinations, but also about, cheating, especially. So regarding cheating, there's this common thing I'm seeing more and more, which is where the teacher says to the students, use the generative AI as much as you want, but you're required to describe how you used it and to be critical of which things that got right or wrong, and so that the student's task isn't just to use it to create something, but to reflect on it and to evaluate it and so on. So that's one kind of answer. Another thing about the web app creation aspect of this is that over over 40 years, I've, when I first started, actually maybe it's 50 years now, with starting first with the logo group. First I was misled by the fact that the teachers that I met were really enthusiastic, really kind of understood the idea of helping kids learn programming, and they could be creative and they could explore their own things and how they could reflect on it and have a very good learning experience. But then I kind of discovered over time that this was a small minority of the teachers that got excited about this programming languages for kids, and that most of them were very worried about it because they felt like, how, the students are going to know more than them. They don't really understand how to do computer programming, and yet they're being expected to, to teach it. It was really, the vast majority of teachers were really uncomfortable, where some countries were requiring them to introduce computer programming. But what's different now is that the process doesn't require kind of a prerequisite technical knowledge. It's much more common sense, kind of back and forth, just the way you would talk to, again, you think of it as pair programming. The teacher could think in terms of, okay, I've got this technically quite proficient assistant that knows how all the programming stuff, and the students could have access to the same assistant. I don't necessarily need to know, all about programming language constructs and concepts. I could deal with things at a higher level of common sense, kind of, oh, this isn't working right, or I want the planets to move this way, or I want, the ants to be able to leave a trail back so that the other ants could find the food, or whatever it is that it's all at the level of that doesn't require a kind of technical background. And I think that teachers that are more will start to realize that are open-ended to this, to find this a step up from the older idea that they had to help students to do computer programming, because that worked only for the minority of teachers that really understood programming well and were excited about it.
Thank you very much, Ken. Since at this point there are no additional questions, and of course it's already past 10, at least here, Central European time. So we will wrap up slowly. There's a few slides that we want to share with everybody. Hope you enjoyed this webinar and Professor Khan's talk, and happy to announce our next webinar. Feel free to join as well. It's Understanding Self-Directed Out-of-Class Language Learning with Technology on 2nd of April. As you can see, the information is listed on this slide. Feel free to join. And then also kindly ask if you could reflect on your experience today. So there's supposed to be a survey for that. So your feedback is very important. Please use this QR code to let us know how you felt about the topic, and feel free to suggest other topics as well. We really do hope you enjoyed this talk. Again, thank you for joining us again this morning or afternoon if you're not in Europe. Thank you, Professor for this amazing talk. We really learned a lot, and hope to see you again soon at some of our future webinars.
Yeah, thanks for arranging it. Thanks everybody for listening in. One last thing is the slides all have links to all sorts of resources. So if you're interested, there's a lot more to investigate.
Thank you very much. So the slides will be available. And to all of you today, thank you very much for joining, and see you again soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.